And the thing I want to mention about comparative mythology is like, there's a common trend, and I'm guilty of it too in in my sessions and all, of many scholars of comparative mythology and even enthusiasts like me. We tend to cherry pick certain stories or characters from different mythologies, and then we try to look at these strands of common strands of narrative to make a point, which is in some ways it's interesting. It's a good way of approaching because it leads to new thinking, new perspective and all. But there's a danger out there. The danger itself is that there's a chance of missing the point of the stories. And the danger is also of the fact that then you don't tend to look at the stories of any of the culture in their own lens. You tend to bring the comparative lens every time you're approaching a new story, and that can also lead to not understanding any of these myths in their own mythical framework, which can I think the problem that comes is that sometimes when you're reading into a story, you tend to think of all the other stories you've read to bring that perspective in, and you kind of miss some of the nuances of the stories itself, because remember, many of these stories were spoken independently, written independently. So it's important to remember that comparative mythology is a good thing, but there is a limitation and there's a danger of us bringing our own projections. Just to give you an example, I want to, just to reiterate this point, I'm going to use the metaphor I've used before about cuisines as mythology. Like the idea that, asking someone what's the best mythology is asking like, what's the best cuisine. We all have different preferences and all. So according to me, this limitation is something like comparing the idea of biryani to sushis. Now, just because there is the common ingredient is rice, and yes, there is a if you kind of taste it and you try to you look at the history and all, you will have a beautiful history coming out, very different history of how biryani was formed and how sushi was formed, and maybe you can trace it back to the agrarian culture of how rice cultivation happened. But to enjoy, you may have a preference of either of the particular dishes, but you would not really enjoy it while you're comparing it to the other thing. So imagine having biryani. We all probably must love biryani and all, and thinking of sushi at that point of time, or having sushi and thinking of biryani, you're not going to really enjoy it in its own terms. Even if you want to understand how biryani was formed or sushi was formed, even the cooking techniques have to be understood within their own cultural norms. How biryani was cooked within, like, the traditions that went into creating dum biryani and sort of a thing, and how sushi was itself formed and all, right? So it's what my suggestion is that when we are looking at any of the stories, we're going to be looking at it. I would ask you guys to look at the stories in their own terms first. Look at all the stories, and then we'll come back to the comparative part. Okay, it's okay if certain ideas and all flow in, which is obviously the point of the stories. But the idea is not to get too derivative and to look at the entire myth or even their entire culture from that comparative lens, because that's very reductive and probably disrespectful in some ways.